Hello, Inspi family. Thank you so much for joining us again on this episode of the Inspiwords podcast. As promised, I am bringing you one of the authors, South African authors, who has written an incredible book. One of the things I want to do is to make this a platform for South African authors, especially self published authors, to cultivate a culture of reading. You would remember one of the episodes that we did on cultivating a culture of reading. And now I'm bringing you one of the authors who has written an incredible book. It's titled Orphaned with Living Parents. Her name is Vanessa Neo Mathope. Welcome to the Inspiwords podcast, Neo.
Thank you, Dr. Ndaba. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for this piece. It really is a masterpiece. It's titled Orphaned with Living Parents. The title itself says read me. The title itself says read me because we never really associate being orphaned with someone who has living parents.
Yes.
So it's quite an incredible contrast,
Yeah.
even on the actual, title. Please tell me, what was it that inspired the choice of words?
I guess I've always felt like I was an orphan, despite both my parents being alive when I was younger. Just before I turned 10, I had the both of them together. I was never really in the same house with the two of them long enough to even form a bond with either one of them. So yeah, it has always been that thing that...
Tell us the story then. Tell us the story that inspired the book.
the
Because
book.
for me, when I read this, it was quite mind blowing. As we were coming in, I was saying, this is a movie. That's how mind blowing the story is. And it seems like it's a deep story and it's quite a moving story. Please just give us the background of the whole story and then we'll take it from there.
Oh, okay. I think before I became a mother, it never like bothered me that my parents were absent. I thought I had flushed them off my system and I thought I was okay. And then in 2013, I became a mother. So as my daughter got older, she started asking me questions. Mommy, how is it possible that daddy has his mom and his dad and the grandmother and you only have Kokomaji? At first, I thought, let me just give her something, she'll stop asking. So I said, both my parents died when I was 10 years old. So she came back again and she said, Mommy, it's Easter, we must go and take flowers to your parents' graves. But only my mom had passed on. My dad is still alive. So now I had to explain where was the other grave. Now my lies are catching up with me.
But what happened? What got you to the point where you would tell your child that both your parents had died when only your mother had
Yeah.
passed away? What happened?
I have never really had a relationship with my father. The only thing that I have, is his face, really.
Yo.
Because people that know my father, they can tell when they look at me like, hey, are you from Bapong? We know your dad. I'm like, no. I'm like, no, I'm not. But yeah, I'm just one of those weird people that I look like my mother and like I look like my dad. Because the people who know my mother, when they look at me, they say, Jane utsogile mo baswing. And then when I see somebody who knows my dad, they're like, I feel like I've seen you before. Are you so and so's child? And I'm always like, no. Then they ask for my surname and I say it's Mathope, and they'll be like, if Noli Musupi would swear, this guy is your father.
Also, you don't use your father's surname.
No, I got married, so I'm using my husband's surname.
I
Yeah,
see. But
so
before then, did you use your father's surname?
I did.
Okay.
But even then, with surnames, you always get people that I could be Musupi, but be from a different place
Yeah.
altogether. So even when people saw that, like Musupi, and they saw my face, and they still needed confirmation from me, Jorge, are you Constable Musupi's child? And I was like, no. I said, that's strange. That's weird because like it looks so much like him. It's like, no, I don't know him. Because I did try to to have a relationship with him. You know, in your teenage years, you feel like, I need my dad. I need. Like with my first graduation in 2009, I graduated from Boston Business College, and I called him. I was happy. I was a top student. I'm like, yo, Papa. I thought he was going to be proud. The first thing he said was, I don't have money. So I said, I'll send you money to come to the graduation. And then he said, no, I'm not coming. Ke tla be ke le busy.
Eish.
So I was like, okay. So I got a job in 2009, and people felt like it was a fancy job. So again, I went and I called him like, yo, Papa, I got a job. I'm now staying in Centurion. He was like, okay. Like, why are you telling me all this? So I was like, okay, maybe I'm bothering this person.
Yeah.
So I got to a point where I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to call him anymore. I'm done with him. In 2013, I bought my first car. And I had that urge to call him again to say, yo, Papa, I bought a car. But something in me said, don't.
Eish.
So I didn't call him, but one of my aunts, my mother's cousins, stays Kolekabile with us. So they talk, and he would come, even when he was not coming to see me, he would go and sleep over there and spend time there. And then somebody would tell you, "Ke bona ntata hao?" I'm like,
You?
okay. That's just weird, because both my mom and dad, they stayed not too far away from my grandmother's house where I was staying.
But why were you staying with
But
your grandmother?
the story that my grandmother told me, nna ga ke thoma ke tlhalefa, was that she had to take me from my mother when I was 3 months old because my dad was hitting her. So she was trying to make sure that I don't get
Exposed to.
or caught in that fight. Because one of the things that she told me about him was that when my mother was pregnant, he would smoke in a room. So I was born with asthma
Because of that.
because of that. So it's the only thing really that I knew about him when I was growing up. Because every time I'd get an asthma attack, my grandma would get so upset. Like, "Ke mosobi.
Eish.
It's him. I'm waking up in the middle of the night because of him." So, but that's the only time you'd ever hear her mention his name. When you ask, it's something else.
It's like a no-go zone. You don't talk about that
Yeah,
here.
when she wants to mention him, should do it. But then when you ask her,
But it also
what's
seems
the real story?
from the book.
Like,
From the book, it also seems that whenever his name is mentioned by the grandmother, it would be at a time when she's angry about something that has happened. you
That's
know.
the only time you get to hear my father's name. Like,
The other thing for me that was quite that really took my attention in reading this book is that throughout the book, it seemed like you had a lot of anger towards your mother and not really your dad. What is it about the relationship with your mother that made you so angry as a young lady?
I think, bana ba basetsana, we all want to be a mommy's best friend. I've seen it with my own daughter. Like I said, before I had a child, it never really bothered me. So after I gave birth, I was sitting there in that hospital bed, and I look at my child, and she looks so much like my husband, and I'm thinking, what am I gonna do if this man leaves? Am I going to hate my child like my mother hated me? I think in that moment, in that hospital bed, that's when I started to go through the emotions of that little child to say, this can't be happening. Couldn't she look like me?
Ish.
Then when I look at her, I see me. However this marriage goes, she's my child. Now she has this man's face. What's going to happen? Because I've always felt like the reason my mother couldn't stand me was because I looked a lot like my dad when I was young. As you can see on that picture, I don't look like her there. I was just a replica of my dad. So I felt like when she looked at me, she felt like, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be in this situation. So we never really had a relationship. Even when she came to my grandmother's house to nurse her bruises that my dad had given her, when somebody looks at you with hatred, you can feel it. Even as a child, bana man, when they see somebody, even if that person is not related to them, they want to talk, they want to touch, should maybe push you or just make it very clear that I do not want you close to me. So I've always had that, yo, what have I done to this woman? Why does she hate me so much? I think for me, the last straw was on the day that she took her own life. Because she was lying in a bed, and then I got there, I got excited, and I wanted to hug her. I got on the same bed, and she snapped. She snapped.
Yeah.
So I went, go morago ga me, and then I cried, and I was like, I hope this time she dies for real. Because
Yo.
I had wished
Yeah.
many times before.
Yeah, you do say this in the book.
That,
Yeah.
you know, like sometimes you do something and I would look at her and I would make believe and be like, I hope she dies. I hope she dies. I hope she dies. And then when I'm calm, I'd be like, but if she dies, I won't see my grandmothers anymore. Because my grandmother and her sisters, they had a close relationship. Every time these two had fought, they would come. But like that elderly advice, like, no, lenyalo la itshokelwa, you need to go back, you know, lebitla la mosadi ke bogadi.
Talk to me about the marriage, because I think there is something about your mother's marriage and your father's marriage that really impacted you quite strongly, and we will go there. Just briefly talk to me about your father's marriage and what you saw in that.
I don't think that thing qualifies to be called a marriage, honestly.
Yo.
No, like really. When you become a wife and you become a mother, and then you start comparing the two, okay, how did it make sense to my mother that it was okay to give me away and stay in this marriage? You shouldn't have to choose between being a mother or being a wife. If you can have it both, just be a mother. No, like really, that's how I feel now. So from that marriage, I've always had this thing. I felt like it comes with a lot of sacrifice, especially from the woman's side. I've always felt like had my mom at least had a job or some sort of an education, she could have walked away because the only thing that she had was being married to a policeman. And it was a big thing for her. If that was to be taken away from her, she felt like she was nothing. So for now, I wanted to be educated more than anything. Like you said, that my about the author page is very long.
Yeah.
I got my first job when I was in grade 11. So I never had to ask anybody, please give me money to do my hair or my nails. I've always had a job. I've always studied. Because if you have those two things, then lenyalo doesn't define you. When it goes bad, you just walk. And then she had to stay in it because it was the only thing.
And you talk about this in the book. I want to read on page 119.
Okay.
Because for me, this part, which is what you're just narrating now, tells us the impact of what children would see between their parents.
Yes.
And parents never think about that when they do their fights.
They
and
never do.
It's such a long-lasting impact. Here you speak about how it affected even how you view marriage itself, how you interacted with boys, and what happened to you when your boyfriend proposed to you. And he wanted you to be his wife, and that was quite a shock for you. So I want to read on page 119, and it speaks about your mother, and it says, she was led to believe that being Mrs. Musupi was the greatest honor and symbol of success she could ever be able to accomplish. When I heard that, I hated the idea of being so-called Mrs. So this is now how the relationship of the parents, the marriage of the parents affected your perception of marriage. And it says here, I made a promise to myself that the only title that would ever come before my name would be the one that I would have earned academically. Initially, that was the reason why I wanted to become a PhD holder, so I could be a doctor of some kind. However, I had to come to acknowledge that I was studying for the wrong reason, which is also something very powerful right there, because it shows us that getting to this education was a trauma response. So it was
Yes,
coming
it
out of a
was.
place of emptiness, a place of being hurt, and is trying to cover,
Yes.
a particular hurt. And it says, my obsession with being educated had stopped me from living my life. I wanted to finish quickly and become a doctor whilst I was still young. That's how I ended up at is it on there?
Yeah.
Because I was after the doctor title. Talk to us about the traumatic experience, like how traumatic it was. The fact that you felt that your mother gave you away and abandoned you for this marriage that was not treating her the way she was supposed to be treated. And you witnessing the pain that she went through. She would always come home bruised to nurse her bruises and still go back to that marriage. How did that affect you?
It kills you. I won't lie to
Sure.
you. Like, you'd have this pretty face, but there's nothing inside of you. No life, none whatsoever. Like I said in the book, when I got a job in Centurion, and Tato, one of the friends that I had, she said, let's go to church. Because that's how all the good friends that I have in my life do it. They either buy me a Bible on my birthday or they take me to church. All of them. All of them. So I was always asking them, "Okay, how guys, do you feel that I need God? Why are you always giving me Bibles or taking me to church?" But it makes sense because my grandmother was a priest, so I guess she must have prayed. Oh, those are the kind of people that must be in my life. So the church that she took me to, I thought we were going to church, worship, but no, we were going to some rehab in Pretoria. You know, people that were in motor
Oh,
vehicle
yes.
accident,
Yeah.
yeah, and they lost their legs and whatever, and they are quadra. What you know, you get somebody that was a teacher, for example. Now they are in that rehab because
paraplegics.
yes,
Yeah.
they're just lying there. So the one time we went there, like we went every Wednesday, but there was just this one particular Wednesday that we went. One of the people that we had gone into their wards that we were praying for, when we were done, he says to me, "Come here."
Yo.
So I went. He says, "You know, you have such a beautiful smile." Okay, thank you. Mara, I feel like there's too much pain in your eyes. You know, even the smile doesn't take away that is in your eyes. I don't know what it is, but you must go home and pray about it. Next week when you come, you must tell me if you want to talk about it. I go to my room that evening and I was just crying. I was crying. I was like, how is it possible, Jorge? People babaleng mo wheelchairing and people that life has taken so much from them, they still find a way to smile and be happy. And I'm hanging on to something. Se ke feelang gore I never had. Yes, I never had both my parents come to a school meeting, or I don't even have a picture with the two of them.
Sure. Yeah.
Ne? That's how bad it was. Like that picture on the cover of the book, we had to use
Yeah.
technology just to make it come to life. Because I don't have a picture with my mother or with my father or with the two of them together. So I was just sitting there and I was thinking, "Ke kwatetseng pila pila? Why am I so upset?" And in that moment, obviously, you're not going to get the answers. But I slept it through. And then the next week, we went again. So I was more open-minded now when I was going there to say, maybe I'm not just coming here to pray for those people. Maybe I'm here because I need to be prayed for. Lena. So only when we went to that retreat, Yago, the real church now.
Yeah.
The young adults weekend away, and then I was sitting in that room and everybody was saying, "Oh, marriage is such a bliss, it's a beautiful thing." And I was like, what are these people talking about? Because remember now only knew one marriage. Just that
The
one.
model you were exposed to
That
is
one, just that one.
completely different from what they were talking about.
Yes, what these people were talking about. And they were young. Like, they were like you guys. They were like young couples, nearly the young adults. So you can imagine they were very young. So I'd convince myself, it's new love. That's why. I would find excuses to say it's not possible for people to be this happy. It's because they are young. It's because they have money. It's because. But then when I went back after the retreat, I don't know what happened. Like in that retreat, I cried so much. I didn't know I could cry as much as I did. I was and even in that moment, I still didn't know what I was crying about. But when I got to my room, I looked at my mother's picture and it was like I was seeing a different person altogether. And for the first time, I actually saw myself like, so if I fall pregnant, I'm gonna be pretty like her.
Yeah.
Because in that picture, she was pregnant, but she had a small bum, yeah, and I was like, so I'm gonna look like this, and I was thinking, am I thinking of being pregnant? This is
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah. So for me, that was that. It's very difficult to switch from this thing that you have known for bophelo ba gago bo botlhe, and all of a sudden you see something else. I'm like, okay, that's nice.
In the beginning of the book, we carry this idea as we read that your mother sort of left you and abandoned you. She just didn't love you, but you were her biological child.
Yes.
And you were raised by your grandmother who took you in and raised you as her own child.
Yes.
And you even say that to you, that is your real mother. And you, in the book, you refer to your mother as your birth mother and then the grandmother as your mother. We get to this point in the book where your dad is calling your grandmother. Actually, is calling you,
Me, yes.
asking and telling you that his mother is sick, is in the hospital, and he would like you to go and visit.
Yes.
And then the grandmother jumps into that. Tell us that story. What happened in that revelation? Because I think for me, that is when I'm like, oh, the plot changes now. Because we had this idea that this lady abandoned you and she hated you, but
Yeah.
through that phone call and the conversation you had with the grandmother afterwards.
That's the same thing that Zama said when she was reading the book. I feel like something is missing here. I can't even change it because I'll be lying. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, no, so tell us that story.
So, like I said, okay, my dad, I can count the number of times that I spoke to him in one hand, even
sure.
now as a 34-year-old woman.
Yeah.
But he always knows what's going on in my life for some strange reason. When I
keeping
buy
tabs on you.
yes, when I buy a new car, he knows. When I move into a townhouse, he knows. So he would call, and when he calls, it's like we've been talking. It feels like he sounds like it's a continuation of something. He'd be like, "Hello, Neo, ke papa."
How?
Okay. Koko how nyaka, hashapo. And I was like, Koko aka ke na le ena mo. Because I was with my
Yeah.
grandmother. It's like, "Ke na le koko aka mo." It's like, no, mama ka hashapo and o nyaka. Re mo Brits hospital. Ba mpoditse hore ha o nne koko le le yona.
Yeah.
Etla. Like etla. So obviously when somebody's standing not too far from you, they can
To hear what's
going
happening on the phone. Yeah.
Yes. So my grandmother grabbed the phone because it sounded like "Kgale ntse re bua." And then she says to him, "Stop calling my child. You don't call her for anything. You've lost that right." And then she hangs up. So she says to me, "So o feel like you're okay, ya no mo bophelong, you have made it. You're going back to your dad. After
Eish.
I had raised you." I was like, "No."
How did you feel about that?
This is the first phone call from that guy in a very long time that I've received. And she says, "No, I heard what he said. You've been talking to him." Because there's no way that somebody can call you after 5 years and say, "Mama ka wa o batla ke mo, le ntse le bua." So I said, "No." And in that moment, obviously, because this person is the only parent that I've had, bophelo ba ka, bo botle, pelo ya ka e botlhoko. I'm like, how can you say that? But then, ka mo tlhong ya hae, because I had asked before, what really happened? So, because my grandmother had asked her before, she had that thing, ya go, you two have been in contact. You've been talking. You want to go to your father now. Now that you are educated and you're okay, you want to go back to him. After he abandoned you want to go back to him. So in that moment, she just lost it. And she told me, she said, "I do not want you anywhere near that man." So I just kept quiet because that's what I did most of the time when she spoke. You know how grandmothers are. She's the adult, you keep quiet, she talks, it's
And
done. Yeah.
in after that conversation, in the book we read that it sparked another deep conversation now
Yes.
that came with what you call the great revelations
Yeah.
about what happened to your mother. What
Yeah,
happened?
yeah. Well, my grandmother said that she did not want me to have a relationship with my dad because the real reason she took me from my mother was because my paternal grandmother was trying to kill me. So she said that I had a twin brother who died when my mother was giving birth to us because she went into labor. She was staying with my other grandmother, my father's father. Yeah. So she just looked at her like, yeah, okay, you're in labor, so what? You know, I think maybe ke bomme ba kgale, but they had issues. Le bana ba basimane, gore ke ngwanaka. I made him what he is, so he must work and take care of me. I think maybe my paternal grandmother was that kind of a person. So, because my father was now going to have his own kids, it meant that my mother was going to be the beneficiary of whatever she thought that my father had.
Yeah.
So it was easier for her to just get rid of us, the two of us. But for some strange reason, I made it. And then my grandmother said, that's why I called you Neo, because we didn't think that you'd leave. After what happened, we didn't think that you'd leave. I called you Neo as in you are a gift. And the only thing that kept us sane in that moment when your mother told us what happened to her, in a little tapelo, and just seeing that tiny person and just looking at her and say, please make it just for us. So when she told me that, obviously now, ke setse ke le motona thata, I've already hated my mother for so long. Because
Yeah.
that's not the story that I got initially. They said to me, I took you because your dad was hitting your mother. So if I was the only child, that would make sense. But I have a brother and a sister. When I was looking at it, me staying with my grandmother, these ones are not living with us. I was, maybe
It
my
made
dad
no
is not.
sense.
Yeah, I was
It's not
thinking,
really about removing us,
yes, it's not
from the
about,
fights
it's
and
not about the fight. This woman just doesn't like me. She just doesn't want me. At some point, I thought to myself, maybe I'm not my father's child. That's why I'm not staying there. And then
Sure.
looking at the age gap, I thought, just an oops baby. So it
Yo.
makes sense. These people had forgotten how to raise kids. So when you get told, "Osezolo motona thata yalo," obviously I spent so much time of my life thinking, she doesn't want me. They don't want me.
And did the revelation that it was not actually the fact that your mother hated you. It's not like she gave you away or abandoned you, but your grandmother is the one who
Who
took you
took
from the mother. And because for me, that's like a twist of the plot altogether. And I'm like, what happens now? Did
Yeah.
that change how you felt about your mother?
It didn't, honestly, it didn't. Mamaka never really made an effort to have a relationship with me. I did say in the book, oh, I was a sickly baby when I was growing up. I'd have asthma attacks left, right, and center. And my grandmother was against me using asthma pumps because somebody said to her, they're going to kill me. Ne? So I was sick too often. My mother didn't come. She was staying a walking distance from us. And one of her cousins, he was still in high school. He got arrested in Taung when they went there for a school trip.
Yes, I remember that story
She
from the book.
took, I don't know how many taxis to get to Taung to post bail for that cousin. Pero aga nele botlhoko. So I said to my grandmother, how does your child travel from here, aye Taung, and yet she never comes here, I can't check. When I graduated, go crashing, my mother was not there. Even when the teacher would give me a letter and say, bring a parent, and she was at home nursing her bruises, she would never go with me to school. And she'd go Kotaung to post bail for somebody. So for now, I felt like, there is no story that could justify gore, why she never made an effort to have a relationship with me.
So and now you have this thing that you were finding out about your mother, and did it change your relationship with your grandmother?
I don't think there's anything that could happen that could make my grandmother look like a bad person.
Okay.
Like nothing at all. Like, one of the things that a lot of people told me that I found very difficult to believe because, we read and we are educated was that when my grandmother took me from my mother, because when I'm breastfeeding mama and I was still so young, I was crying the whole time and she couldn't get me to keep quiet. So umfile letswele la gage. Ene a re she thought gore the milk wouldn't come out because she was never pregnant. But unabona how often I wanted to feed. And then she checked, halebella molomo wa ka, there was milk in my mouth, and she was thinking, Lord, what is this? So I think for me, connection yaka with her is just as deep as what I would have had with my mother who gave birth to me.
Sure.
Maybe had we been in a room long enough for something to form a bond. Mamaka wanted nothing to do with me.
Okay.
Nothing,
so
nothing.
you keep going back to that.
Nothing.
And even in the book,
Yeah.
as I was saying earlier in the beginning, one thing I found strange was that the whole book until like chapter 9, it's about your experience of living without your mother.
Yes.
But your father was there, and you don't say anything about your father. You don't talk about your father not taking you to teacher parent meetings. You don't talk about your father not coming to check you, because as much as your mother lived a walking distance away from you, even your dad, because they lived together. How do you explain that?
I think because Papa Guy has always been painted as this bad person. Lena, I thought by being away from him, I'm protecting myself. If the first thing that you learn as a child, your dad gave you asthma.
Ish.
It's painful. Asthma. So when you get that attack, the first thing that comes is Papa gave me this. So I started off, I think, resenting him, and I got to a point where I just completely flushed him off my system because I had way too many asthma attacks.
And you keep on saying in the book, he's dead to me.
No, like he is. And for some strange reason, he remembered that he has a child, and
Sure.
he came to my grandmother's house, and my daughter was there. So because now she's older, she looks at him, and she looks at me, and she says, "Mama, who's this guy?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, he's some uncle who comes here now and then.
Ish.
He says, is he your father? He doesn't look anything like Mamokholo Malome, so he must be your father. And then she looks at me again. Didn't you say your father was dead? And he's dead.
How did he take it?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to move to Atlene. So you in the book you say, I think that was the biggest transformation.
Yes.
When Atle was born, she asked questions about your father and
my mom, yes.
your mother. And in verse
A verse.
in page 127, this thing of verses. I think it's in chapter 9, page 127. You say something very powerful. It says here, my daughter made me realize. So in asking these questions,
Okay.
in asking the questions about your dad and your mother, it says, my daughter made me realize that my wounds never healed. They just stopped bleeding.
Yes.
And when I read this, my head was like, boom. Because I cannot imagine how many people continue living their lives with unhealed wounds,
Yes.
thinking that they have healed just because the wound is not bleeding.
Yeah.
You had not realized the depth and the gravity of the hurt and the pain that was caused by being abandoned, that was caused by the kind of hurt that your mother was going through, the fact that your mother committed suicide, and all of these things that happened, growing without your parents. Your daughter made you realize that your wounds had not healed, they just stopped bleeding?
You know, when I was still single, I had met so many people that said, you know, I knew I loved you the first time I saw you. And I was like, what? How does that even happen? Because for me, before I had my own child, I laughed with my head, not my heart.
You
'Cause
liked the
I was trying.
players,
Yes,
actually.
I thought that I was protecting myself from being had. So my love always started with the eyes. I wanted
You
those
have to be
guys.
cute and
Yes.
be intellectual. I
Yeah.
see. I read it in the
Yes,
book.
yes. For me, like the prerequisites, you had to be those guys. When you stand at the door, all the girls in the room go,
And they
that's
want
those are
you.
the kind of guys I wanted, because with those guys there are no commitments, nothing. You know, the relationship would end. You won't realize, because there are no good morning text messages or good night. It's those things like, hi, okay,
Yo.
yeah, ke tlo bona today. Okay, yeah, sharp. For me, that was it. It worked. So when now you become a mother, you don't look at somebody and say, oh, I know this baby, I don't like her. I don't want this one. I had my love at first sight moment with my daughter. And I was thinking, what is this feeling that I'm feeling? Because it's so unfamiliar. What is this? You know, you just look at this tiny person and she looks at you and she looks like she's smiling. You're like, so she can see me. So in that moment, I was thinking, I thought I was okay. But it looks like I never really took time to even acknowledge gore pelo ya ka ne e le botlhoko with everything that has been happening mo bophelong ba ka. So in that moment, I had to sit with myself and just redefine things that I thought I knew. And I was like, I never healed. I just ke tsentse dilo ka mo closeting e be ke tswala lebati, and then I walked away like nothing happened. But now I needed to heal, because I wanted to be a better mom. I wanted to be a better wife to my husband. I wanted to be a better person in jail. So I realized in that moment, oh, you know what? I don't think I knew what love was before I had a child. And because I didn't know what it was, I couldn't give it or
Eish.
live with it.
Or
Because,
receive it.
yes, because my husband, he's just one of those people. For him, it was love at first sight.
Yeah.
He's just the moment he saw me, he could have gone to American Sweets and bought a ring. It was done for him. And I was looking at him, I was like, I'm 19. I'm not looking. I'm okay. I'm happy. But he never stopped. You know, when somebody wants something, he never stops. I met him today. The next morning, he introduced himself to my grandmother.
Hey,
And I'm
bana.
like, what is this? What are you doing? Okay, what if I have a boyfriend? Are you
Yo.
good? Then o tla tshaba, o kwa ha o tlo betha, o na le batho ba bantši. I was like, no, this is not how we do things.
I see.
But yeah, for me, you know, when my daughter was born, that's when I could now poke holes to say, so I thought I was loving people when I was doing that. Wrong.
We read in the book about the healing process now. Still also in chapter 9, where you are continuing to speak about your relationship with your daughter and how her asking questions made you realize that actually you had not healed. And there is this moment you are writing about of watching a movie
Yes, yes.
and what that did to you. Please talk to us about that.
Yes, I can't remember what that movie is called.
It's called Overcomer.
Overcomer.
You wrote the whole
Yes.
book.
And I was just telling my niece about that movie like 2 days ago. So I was watching this movie, and there was this girl. She was running there, but she had asthma, and she was raised by her grandmother. Her dad was a sportsman, so he, you know how sports people are most of the time. He had money and things, so he was into drugs, and he introduced the mom to drugs. So she died. The maternal grandmother was very protective of this asthmatic child. So much so that she said to her that your father died, but then the daughter learned that the father was still alive and he was in hospital. He couldn't see or do anything, he was just lying there on a bed. She said to her grandmother, Are, I have already lost out on so much time. Le papa, I just want to get to know him. So in that moment, I was thinking, Kere, you know, if this child could forgive Moto Elangore, he gave the drugs to the mother that killed her, then why can't I just let this go? So at that time, I didn't have my father's number, unfortunately. I couldn't call him to say, I'm looking at this movie and I'm crying and I feel like I need to forgive you. So I wrote a letter. I sat there and I wrote a letter. And when I was done, I felt like I had, like lifted a weight off my shoulders. I felt so light. When you write a letter, you can just, without being interrupted. So I wrote. But that letter, I can't even read it. It's like I just wrote it and it's there somewhere in the cupboard. Somebody will find it someday and hopefully maybe get it to him.
What did it do to you writing that letter? What did it do to you?
I'm in a better place now. I'm sure if my dad walked in Honan, I'd probably make him coffee.
How did your daughter take the story when the plot changed, and she finds out that actually Umkhulu is not dead, is alive?
I I did not introduce her to him like that,
Okay.
because that thing of my daughter looking like my husband came in very handy for me this time. Even when my father saw her, he couldn't link her to me.
you.
So he thought, oh, it's just one of those kids who came to play. Even when she said, I thought you said your... No, he was, I don't think he was paying attention when I was talking to her. Because, when you look at a child and you just can't put the two together, you don't really pay that much attention. So my daughter, I said, okay, this guy comes here now and then, fine. But then I said, you know what, let me write this book. When she's old enough to know truth, like the truth about her grandparents, she will read for herself. I don't think I'm strong enough to sit with my daughter and say, look, this is what happened.
Oh,
No.
yeah, I see.
She will read the book for herself.
herself,
Every time that uncle comes and she's like, Mama, I'm like, yeah, this uncle comes now and then, it's fine. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. I think there's a lot we can talk about in this book. There's quite a number of themes that I found to be quite powerful in reflecting for us what happens when parents make certain decisions and choices in their lives and the impact that it has on their children, not only as children, but also as adults.
adults, yeah.
Looking at the fact that you had to deal with these things when you already have your own child.
Yes.
You had to deal with these things when you are already a wife and you have a husband. And how long it took for you to get to a point where you find your healing. I think for me, that is something that is very much important for us to see. And I think it shapes us as readers to think about our own choices and the impact that it would have on the next generations, but also to think about our own experiences. Because as I'm doing this series on father-child relationships, I find that there's a lot of people, that have those kinds of relationships. And I think it makes us question our healing. When you said that the wound, you thought the wound had healed, but it had just stopped bleeding. There's many people who have father-child issues, mother-child issues that are feeling like their wound has healed just because it's not bleeding. And I think reading this book makes you realize that actually there's still that part of me that I need to deal with, because you start seeing how it affects how you relate with people. It affected how you related with your siblings.
Yes.
It affected how you related with even boys, how you related with your husband. And I think sometimes when parents make these choices, this is something they hardly ever think about. And thank you so much, guys, for listening. I hope you were inspired by the book. Please do get it. It's quite a powerful book. It's a very touching and moving story, and I'm sure you'd enjoy reading it. Until next time, let's continue giving our dreams a chance.